Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Daniel Stranges and I work in alumni relations for the Goodman School of Business. I would like to begin this gathering today by acknowledging the land on which Brock University was built is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us as we acknowledge and celebrate the Goodman School of Business's Distinguished Graduate of 2021. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Andrew Godes, Dean of the Goodman School of Business, for a welcome from Goodman. Andrew?
Wonderful, thank you, Daniel. Welcome alumni, students, faculty, staff, friends, and community members to the 20th annual Distinguished Graduate event. So each year we recognize a member of our alumni and offer you the opportunity to hear from an astounding leader of ours, our 2021 Distinguished Graduate this year, Cheryl Brandon of the Goodman School of Business. The Distinguished Graduate Award recognizes individuals with outstanding professional, educational, community, volunteer, or entrepreneurial achievements with at least 15 years postgraduate experience. We recently announced Cheryl as this year's recipient of the Distinguished Graduate Award, and it's our honor to pay tribute to her today. Under normal circumstances, we'd be gathered together in the Goodman School of Business atrium right to my left here, hosting a reception in honor of Cheryl. Unfortunately, we remain in a virtual environment, but you will have the opportunity to hear from an inspiring leader in our business community and how her career exemplifies the Goodman values of passion, perseverance, and professionalism. I'd like to invite Manpreet Sandhu, one of our Goodman student ambassadors, to provide a brief introduction of Cheryl.
Thank you, Dean Godes. Hi, everyone. My name is Manpreet Kaur Sandhu, and I am a Goodman Student Ambassador. I'm currently in my third year of the International Double Degree Program, concentrating in accounting. I'm excited to be here today to learn from an outstanding Goodman alumnus. I'd like to introduce our viewers today to Cheryl Brandon, Founding Partner Investment Management with Waterton Global Resource Management. Cheryl graduated in 2004 with a Bachelor of Business Administration with a major in finance from Brock University. Cheryl has been instrumental in the success of Waterton Global, co-leading multiple fundraising campaigns totaling $1.75 billion US, and providing leadership on portfolio construction and investment management. Prior to joining Waterton in 2009, Cheryl co-managed a resource strategy at a Canadian hedge fund focused on investing in the resource sector. She has more than 15 years of experience managing capital on behalf of Tier 1 global institutions. In addition to her impressive professional accomplishments within the finance industry, Cheryl is also dedicated to her various philanthropic efforts. Cheryl is the co-founder of the Ashley's Angel Fund in partnership with Sick Kids, which raises money for its transplant center. Cheryl is also the founder and director of the Giving to Girls initiative, which is focused on providing education and resources for girls in developing countries. Cheryl served on the board of the CVCA and on the board of the Canadian Women in Private Equity Association. Cheryl is a CFA charter holder and is currently pursuing her master's degree in nonprofit management at Columbia University. Cheryl is an inspiring leader and has been recognized for her outstanding contributions to her industry and for her dedication to the Goodman School of Business. Without further ado, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our Distinguished Graduate of 2021, Cheryl Brandon.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for the recognition. It means a lot to me to be recognized as the Goodman School of Business Distinguished Graduate 2021. It's an honor. So I think it's interesting talking about yourself. I've sat on lots of panels and had lots of fireside chats in my career, and I never had any of them focused on me. So when I began the discussions with the Goodman School of Business on, what my career has looked like and how I ultimately got to the point I got to in my career, I didn't really have anything in mind to put it all together, and it sounded very complicated. And so I put together this outline. I do PowerPoints quite frequently in my profession, but I wanted to kind of put something on a piece of paper that kind of showed, you know, my one path being my professional career in finance, which is pretty straightforward. Business graduate from Brock, finance focus, got into the financial industry working at a hedge fund, and ultimately that I spent the last 12 years of my career in private equity. That's all pretty straightforward. My interest in philanthropy is a huge part of my life, and it's my passion. And so that's a major part of where I spend my time. And then the third part is really my entrepreneurial interests, which also are very important. So in my professional career, I spent the first 5 years at a hedge fund, one in Toronto, one in New York. And then I spent the last 12 years of my career in private equity. The first hedge fund I worked at was a resource-focused hedge fund. I was an associate portfolio manager, learned a tremendous amount about the public markets and how public companies are valued, how they do financings, M&A transactions. It was hugely beneficial as I progressed my career to work at Duff Capital in New York. Again, a hedge fund, but more of a multi-strat platform. 5 years combined at hedge funds, I then transferred over to a family office, which was a bit of a blank sheet paper to say, you know, here's a seat. I understand your background in investing, but what can we create together that's valuable for the family office? Waterton Global was ultimately born out of that family office. Myself and 3 of my partners created it. My background was in mining, having worked in the hedge fund industry. In 2000, if you worked in a hedge fund in Toronto, the majority of what you spent your time on was either mining or oil and gas. So I had developed quite a network in the mining sector and really understood where the value existed in those projects and how to deploy capital in that sector. So between my network, one of my partners who had joined basically 2 weeks after I joined, he had a background, came from Allen & Overy, which is one of the major law firms in the world. He's done hundreds of transactions across Asia and North America. He came in and did the transaction side of it and really understood how to structure deals. And then our other partner, our chief investment officer, was actually the family office. So between the capital, the ideas, the network, the knowledge, we started this business in 2009 with nothing. And 3 years later, we raised $1 billion, built out the team, built out the infrastructure, built out the platform. And today we sit with $2 billion. I'm super proud of what we've done. My role within the firm, I lead the investment team. I serve on the investment committee and the valuation committee. I do all the deal origination, deal structuring and execution, portfolio monitoring, anything relating to exiting investments, raising capital from institutions. And yeah, it's been super challenging, but something that I love and I'm passionate about, and I'm super proud of what we've done. So that leads me to the next part, which is my interest in philanthropy. It began in 2009. I donated part of my liver to my niece, Ashley. Following the transplant, I got involved with my sister, ran the charity, and her husband, and we launched Ashley's Angels. Her husband and I both work on Bay Street, so we were able to leverage our network to help with the fundraising part of it. My sister did an incredible job. She's a true inspiration. She brought together, put these events together, and we raised significant amount of capital, partnered with the kids, and we were able to deploy that capital into programs for research and development to improve the lives of organ transplants. This experience of both being a living liver donor and being involved in a charity really opened up my eyes to having beyond professional goals and personal, and made me want to really do more, have an impact. So I started really researching, you know, what types of things was I really interested in, what types of charities existed that I wanted to be involved with. And I kept being led to young girls, developing countries, and education. So I did spend quite a bit of time working with the charities, and ultimately decided in 2019 to formally launch what's called the Giving to Girls Initiative, following a trip to India, where I had quite an amazing experience meeting incredible people, some incredible children in orphanages, and I decided I really wanted to do something structured so I could understand my impact and really be involved on the ground. So that kicked off in 2019. I spent quite a bit of my time on that. I have some incredible partners I work with. And then more recently, I joined the board of the Tour Hope Initiative. It was founded by one of my closest friends is a colleague, and he is also a true inspiration and is very driven to change the lives of people and build people. And so we work with organizations in Canada and India and help children across the country. At the start of the pandemic, I enrolled in a master's program, something I've always wanted to do, and Columbia offers a master's program for nonprofit management. The thought there for me was, I really enjoy sitting on boards of nonprofits. We're all volunteer, but I want to be able to make my biggest contribution, and really having an understanding of the nonprofit sector, all aspects, has helped me be a better worker and hopefully have a greater impact on the people we're trying to help. So the last area of focus is my entrepreneurial interests. And just to kind of make this clear, I spend 95% of my working week hours on Waterton. So, I do have time on the weekends and in the evenings and to do the other things, which is my entrepreneurial interests, but I really do spend 95% of my time on Waterton Global. It's a huge undertaking to manage the business. So, and obviously, as capital, tier 1 and institutional investors, that is something that I do. But my entrepreneurial interest, the first business I got involved with is Marina on Georgia Bay. It was a family asset. I acquired the business with my sisters. We invested capital and expanded it. It was really my first opportunity to apply theoretical concepts that I had learned in the classroom in a really practical way. So it's one thing to do a financial model in the classroom or calculate returns on investments. It's all great, pull a calculator and make that happen. But in the real world, when you actually start applying it, you really start to understand, risk, commitments, capital, structures. What does it really mean to run a business? How do you make strategic decisions, grow things, make investments? And although it was a very small business, it was a tremendous learning experience. And so we did the whole thing: financial models, capital deployment strategies, structured debt for the business, built up the teams. Took a lot of risk, and it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments where I think my sisters and I also looked around the room and said, what are we doing? But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to be willing to take on that risk and keep going with it. And I think today it's something that we're all very proud of, and it's been a tremendous experience for me. We have a general manager who runs, so I provide mostly today on capital allocation and fund. And I think that's one of the consistent themes throughout my interest is I get involved and start it, put the people in place, provide the funding, and then I typically take a step back and just provide the oversight, which is more like a board or advisory. In 2017, I launched a spirits business in Kentucky, focused on Kentucky bourbon. We raised $125 million, put the senior leadership team in place, structured the offtake contracts, and ultimately, again, provide the oversight today. Super interesting business. Happy to speak with anyone who's interested. Andrew and I had a conversation prior about it. But super interesting business and one that I'm really excited about. In 2018, I launched a venture capital firm. Again, the team in place who essentially does the evaluation, builds up the network to identify really interesting early stage growth opportunities in Canada. In the Canadian market, we have a bit of a challenge when it comes to venture capital. There's a lot of venture capital firms, but unfortunately, they don't tend to participate in early stages cycles of development. And so we end up with this massive funding gap, so dissimilar to Silicon Valley. We end up with this massive funding gap, and most venture capital are participating on Series B's. So what we pride ourselves on doing is getting in very, very early, making sure the team is properly vetted, putting proper capital structures in place. Very risky, but if it works, it works well. And then the last thing on my list is in 2018, we launched GreenCube. When I say we, I do this with my partners. Very driven, passionate people, very like-minded, very ideas. We launched GreenCube. GreenCube is a business that uses machine learning, and it provides strategies, SaaS platform, essentially, for intelligent connectivity. And again, it's really one of those things where you come up with an idea, put the people in place, provide the oversight, capital behind it, and ultimately. So yeah, so I think that's really my background. It's been a very interesting, I think, 17 years now since I graduated from Brock, and I've learned a lot. And I think one thing my biggest takeaway to date is probably that there isn't a path that to follow. I think when I graduated from university, I thought I finished finance, therefore this path I'm going down. In reality, you figure a path and you constantly have to decide what's interesting to you, where your passions lie, and I think I've done a pretty good job of kind of trying to follow that.
Well, Cheryl, I'm exhausted listening to what you've been able to do in this short period of time. Any one of those three rows that you show in your graphic is a career in itself. It's very inspiring. And so to start, I want to thank you very much for letting us honor you with the Graduate School of Business Distinguished Graduate for this year in 2021. Definitely you represent all of the things that we hold as values within our business school, and to see how you've not only excelled in your professional practice, but also in the social responsibility and also in startup is really inspirational for us to be able to hear. I do want to talk about a number of these different areas and have an opportunity to ask a number of questions. But the first thing I think about is, given what you've been able to do in these years, when you graduated, I know that you were already were somewhat entrepreneurial with the yacht business, but I'm just wondering, when you were graduating, what were you looking at with respect to the full spectrum of what's in front of you as opportunities and directions to go?
Yeah, so I think I had a pretty limited scope. And I think it's just because I didn't really have the knowledge of what opportunities existed, to be honest. So when I was at Brock, I was very fortunate to be able to do a co-op placement. So my program was a co-op program, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity to be involved in a co-op program. It really gives you the practical experience. And when you sit in a boardroom with, your soon-to-be potential boss, and he's asking you or she's asking you questions about your experience, if you don't have something you can speak to, it's really hard to build that connection and really for the individual to understand what you're capable of. So I think, for me, I got a job at Scotia McLeod in my last year of university, my last co-op placement. It was what ultimately opened me to Bay Street. And I say that because when I interviewed, it was actually, I only did one interview, and I interviewed at a hedge fund. And I only knew I wanted to work at a hedge fund because I had kind of read about hedge funds. And it was really the cool thing in like the 2000s, early 2000s, everybody was talking about hedge funds. And I thought, wow, this sounds really cool. I found this job posting at a hedge fund, so I'm going to apply. I obviously didn't think I'd get the job. But when I got into that boardroom and I started talking to the chief investment officer, and I could speak to, I just spent 4 months looking at stocks, fixed income, building portfolios, I understood risk, I understood the capital market. And it really gave me a leg up. Without that experience in that co-op placement, I for sure wouldn't have had that ability to sit across the table from him. So to your question about what I was thinking when I was graduating, I knew I wanted to work in finance. I always knew. I knew from the age of like 7 when I knew I was good at math. I always knew I wanted to work in finance. I knew that I wanted to live in Toronto, right? My career has taken me many different places, but I knew Toronto was the hub. If you're going to stay in Canada, that's where you want to be in finance. And I just knew I wanted to do something with investing capital, and that was pretty much as far as it went for me. I did get out of university. I graduated university my first year while working at Leeward Hedge Funds. I started doing the CFA exams, which are very challenging, and I highly recommend. But it was more kind of a stepping stone to understanding how do you want to manage capital. Do you want to be an associate portfolio manager or a portfolio manager, or do you want to go into research? And then I really started to have an appreciation for all the different avenues within finance. But on day one, it was finance, Toronto, managed capital. And that was pretty much as far as it went.
Okay, so then you're coasting along. Obviously, you like to take on projects and challenges because you were probably not feeling completely satisfied with the direction you're going without bringing in other things from the boundaries. So at what point did you start saying, you know, I think I want to dabble in a little bit of adventure on the side or outside. You mentioned 95% of all your energy is focused with your business in Toronto, but then you started thinking at some point there's more, and I'd like to bring in more, and part of it is the social conscious part, but then there's also just the ventures that you start exploring. So what was it that was driving that, and do you find that you're getting that kind of satisfaction with respect to these other projects that you've taken on?
It's an interesting question. So it's twofold, one professional and one personal. So I'll answer the professional side first. So, you know, 12 years is a long time to be doing the same thing. And I really love what I do. I love structuring transactions, identifying new opportunities to deploy capital. I love raising capital and managing the institutional relationships with our investors. You know, I like the fact that, you know, we do have investors in our business, like foundations, endowments, nonprofits. So we are, you know, in a kind of way doing good. We're making money for those types of organizations, which is great. But I think for me, I'm just intellectually curious. And I find that when I spend too much time doing the same thing over and over, I can stay focused on it. And it's always going to be the priority. But with that other time I have, I want to learn constantly. I always want to be educating myself. I don't think there's going to be a point in my life I'm probably going to be like 95 and I'm educating myself still, because I really truly believe there's so much value in education. And so whether that's educating yourself by doing a master's or whether it's educating yourself by doing a new business venture, when you start a new business venture, you have to learn absolutely everything about that sector. You have to understand and be able to quantify every risk you're taking. And you can't do that unless you dive deep. So I know too much about machine learning I know too much about the spirits business that I should. But I think that for me is really what drives me to have these entrepreneurial interests alongside the core of what I do in my professional career. When it comes to philanthropy, it's a very different response. I think that, you know, I think my experience as a living donor was really impactful and such a positive. And my niece, thankfully, she's healthy. She's a 15-year-old girl in grade 10. She's doing really well. But, you know, I was 27 at the time. I donated part of my liver. Up to that point, hadn't done anything so spectacular. This was pretty spectacular. People would come up to me and say, wow, that's amazing you did that. The answer really is not really amazing that I did it, because I think most people in that situation make a decision. What's amazing is the impact it had and that feeling of changing someone's life. And there's nothing like it that I've experienced. And then as I started to get more involved in philanthropy and the charities, first question I asked the doctor when I woke up after surgery was, would I be able to donate another organ? And they said no. So I could only do it once, so I couldn't get that feeling again and recreate it from that. So I had to find a new way. I was kidding, but I did ask the question. So I started working with my sister on the charity related stuff. And again, we'd host these events and they would be amazing. And people were so giving and generous, and knowing what ultimately the lives you were going to change as a result and the impact you could have. That feeling is not something you can recreate. And I struggle with this concept of, is philanthropy somewhat selfish? Yes, because people do it because it makes them feel good. But at the same time, if you can really make a difference, for me, it's really alleviating suffering for people who are less fortunate. I think that's where it starts to stop. And then I do really feel a connection to, you know, young girls who don't have the same opportunities that I've been so fortunate to have, just because they were born into a country, into a situation, and it's not their fault. And I really want to do everything I can do in this lifetime to make a difference. And that's really, for me, the core of my purpose in life, and will always be there. And I think that's what really gives me the depth of feeling like at the end of the day, I'm making a difference and doing something like true to who I am.
So you're finding then, and I'm glad you actually said personal and professional, because that's one of the things we look at here with our students, is finding that place that they have personal and professional fulfillment in their program, and then when they graduate in the pursuit of it. So then You've got a bit of a yin and yang going on, but do you see something that's going similarly as far as a drive? That you mentioned intellectual curiosity. Is that in the space of both sides, or is there a common thread, is where I'm going at with this, with respect to what drives all of these different projects?
Yeah, it's an interesting question also. I'm not sure there's an intellectual thread, because I think one is very intellectual, right, and the other is very much more emotional. And, you know, they're two very different aspects of who I am as a person. Like, I love learning, of course, and I love being involved in starting new things. And the success, it's not a monetary success, but just the success of seeing a business grow from nothing and being part of that is incredible. And I do majority of my philanthropy work, and also the majority of my entrepreneurial work, and to be honest, the majority of my work at Waterton, I actually have one consistent thread, which is my partner at Waterton. He's been my partner since we started the business. And he also is very driven in philanthropy. He's, you know, one of the brightest people I know when it comes to building businesses, and is, you know, we would never have been able to get Waterton off the ground without him. And so, you know, I think we have that similar shared passion in many aspects of our life, which I think helps when you surround yourself with like-minded people who also have the same interests. I think that really contributes to continuing to push forward and doing the things and finding the things that you enjoy in life.
Yeah. So then and thank you for going back to Waterton. I'm wondering about, in that space, you have your partner, you're working through this. You've been very successful in this space. You mentioned the $2 billion that you've been working with. Now, this isn't an easy ramp up to that level. There must have been some fantastic challenges that you would have faced individually and as a team. Do you have anything that you could speak to about those types of challenges and how you push through?
It's interesting also. I think, so starting the business, we didn't have first of all, we didn't have any anticipation of starting a full-blown private equity business when we started making investments. So I mentioned I joined with the firm, and so the idea was, you know, white sheet of paper. What are we going to do? Like, normally you start a job and you sit down and somebody tells you what the job is, right? I got there, I had a computer, nobody talked to me. I said, this is very weird. Is someone going to tell me, like, do we have like reports I can read, something someone can talk to me about? And then it became very clear that's just not the way that this family office functioned. It was, what are your ideas? Let's talk about how to build a business around it, and let's create something amazing. And so having the ability to take that mining network, leverage it, identify deals, and then bring it all together was kind of how we got started. But that was just the beginning, right? We didn't really have like a path to say, this is what we're going to be when we get older. It was more of, let's just go and see what happens. And then what happened was pretty incredible, as we started putting up great returns, outsized returns. We built a team, and we had this institutional infrastructure that all of a sudden, big foundations, endowments, and pension funds in the US took an interest in. And so the challenges, I would say, for us was probably scaling the business and bringing in the right people. And I think this isn't just a challenge that Waterton faced. I think this is a challenge for most companies. I was actually talking to my brother-in-law last week, and he said that pre-COVID, his company, one of the divisions of his company, had 20 people, and now it has 70. And they're all trying to integrate through virtual. Yeah, it's hard to do in person. It's definitely hard to do virtually. But I think this is a challenge all companies face. They really, scaling is not easy. You can be innovative, you can have ideas, and they can be amazing, but if you put the wrong people in a seat, you're not going to get the right outcome. And so I think we definitely had some challenges on identifying who the right people are. We had a high level of turnover, I would say, in our early years. Today, obviously not the case. We have time. But I think that for us was probably one of the biggest challenges. And really figuring out, you know, we didn't have a playbook for private equity. It wasn't somebody who didn't walk in the door and say, here's how you do it. Although there are people that found them. Right. But initially I spent 6 months in Asia, Hong Kong, South Korea, everywhere you can imagine, just talking to investors. And then we spent 6 months in Europe. Then we found out you're never going to raise capital in Europe and Asia for this type of a strategy. So then you refocus once you kind of learn, but you have to constantly be learning, taking all the information in, pivoting. That's so important, not getting stuck in a specific area of focus, and then building the right team and putting the right people in place.
So interesting, you use the word pivot, and of course, that word's been quite well used in the last 18, 20 months. How has the financial industry, I know it's been quite dramatic, and in some spaces it's been good for where you manage, but how has that been in the past 18 months or so in managing through this? And while you're answering, I'm going to go off screen and turn on the lights because it's motion sensitive, and that's why it's dark right now.
Okay, you went dark, I know. No worries. Yeah, so I think for us, the real impact, I guess I'd say it's twofold. One is our business is primarily based on commodities. So we buy mining assets, we develop them, we own 100% interest, and then we ultimately monetize sales to strategics. The commodity prices have performed very well, like everything else. All the prices need to just go up. And so all of our copper mines, our nickel projects, gold projects have benefited tremendously from the rise in the actual underlying commodities, which then translates into an increase in value of the underlying assets. So I think from that perspective, it's been really positive for us. I'd say one of the biggest challenges has been conducting site visits. So in sales processes, when you're monetizing assets for the buyer to go to the site and do due diligence, given the travel restrictions, it was exceptionally challenging, and we're just starting to get to the point where travel is pretty common now and site visits are happening. But you can't sell anything when you can't get the buyer to site, and yet on the other side, the copper prices, nickel prices, and gold prices are going through, which means the value of your assets are increasing, but you can't sell. So right. It was a unique kind of situation. But things, again, as I said, they're opening up. And then I would say on the people front, we did a tremendous amount of work on restructuring our office for social distancing, putting PPE stations in everywhere. And initially, we did have some trial on bringing some people back to work in small doses and kind of a bit of a hybrid model. But then we decided that wasn't working. So we did shut for most of the pandemic, and then we all had to figure out how to work together virtually, which the whole world did. So we were no different. I think for us, it's a bit challenging because there's a tremendous amount of overlap between the disciplines. And when our teams, not so much my team, but when our mining group is doing value creation work, the geologists have to work directly with the metallurgists, mining engineers, permitting specialists, and it's so much easier when you're sitting beside each other and they have to run everything in parallel versus if they're having to set up Zoom calls 5 times a day. But we got everything done. It took longer than we expected.
Have you found any new innovations that you've kind of fell into in the last 18 months that you're going to keep in place as we go forward and hopefully break through this this disruption in the coming months?
I think that the only thing that probably will change for us is we'll have less travel. I don't think anything otherwise will have an impact. And I think the less travel is just going to be a result of the fact that this is so common practice, having conversations and meeting with investors. Previously, I can tell you, I never had a virtual meeting with one of our investors. We always had to go to their office. They always came to our office. And so now that's completely changed. They don't want to come either. So, and with the travel restrictions still between Canada and the US, most of our investors are in the US. They still can't really come. But I would say that that's probably going to hold for a while, at least, while things return to a bit more of a new normal. But I would say everything else, I think, is probably going to go back to the way it was for us.
Okay. Now, just jumping over now, your philanthropic activities, the Ashley's Angels and Giving to Girls, and now the One Tour Hope initiative. Thinking about the same thing these last 18 months or so with the disruption, has it been a period that has enhanced your connection to children and girls specifically in other regions in a more impactful way because you can be there virtually more often than you could be there physically by virtue of having to leave your office and travel abroad? Has this been a change for you in a positive?
I think for the ability to connect and identify new charities is probably a bit easier. But the one thing I will say, I mentioned this, that in private equity, I didn't do virtual meetings, but pandemic, we did virtual meetings quite frequently in philanthropy. So if I was talking to Made with Hope in Tanzania, I was talking to them on the phone usually because I wanted to get to know them. And that was the only way to really see people and connect. And so I think it's a tool that I've been using for quite a while in the nonprofit world. What I would say has changed since the pandemic is, unfortunately, a lot of funding that goes to international causes has decreased quite significantly because funding was required for domestic causes. So as a result of that, we've been far more active in making sure the capital is going to the right places, and the nonprofits that we have partnerships with, we've been far more actively engaged in really understanding their program needs and then quickly turning around and making decisions so that we can help it more helpful. Then otherwise they would have not necessarily did that to the same extent, but given where we are today and funding availability, it definitely.
Okay, I was wondering, given the Tour Hope you just mentioned, and I've seen more about the Ashley's Angels and the Giving to Girls. Tour Hope is the first time I've seen it actually on the graphic that you shared. I wonder if you wanted to speak to that a little bit and offer that a little bit of light here.
Sure. So Tour Hope is an initiative that was started by one of my colleagues, and he's been working with charities in India for many, many, many years. Actually, the first trip I actually went on and went to an orphanage in India, he took me just to meet with some of the people and actually go to the orphanages, and it was, you know, really impactful. I guess I had this image of it was my first time going to a third world country and going to visit an orphanage, and it was India, and we all understand the income disparity in India. So, you know, I had this image of meeting these children, and they were going to be, you know, suffering and sad. And it was not the case at all. They were loved, they were lovely, loving, and they were hopeful, and they were happy, and they just wanted to be recognized, seen, and touched. And so it was very, you know, very impactful for anyone. So he really kind of, you know, introduced me to some of these different opportunities that I didn't understand and challenges. So he did ask me to join his board, which I was very honored to be part of. And the focus is on children in Canada and also children in India. Children in Canada, it revolves primarily around going into parts of, it's primarily focused in Ontario as well, into some communities, privileged communities, and providing like funding sports teams and scholarships for children to go to school, and providing extra tutoring, giving computers to children, like the basic things that gives children an opportunity to build a future, and whatever that future they choose to build, but at least it gives a platform to build that future. And then India is mostly focused on supporting orphanages and building schools. So it's very much in line with the mission of Giving Girls, but more broadly focused, and something that, you know, I've been interested in being involved in. And
wow. So we've talked about a lot of things you've been doing, and clearly you've demonstrated great skills and prowess in being able to work through and be very successful in almost all these ventures that you've presented. And now you're going to school, and you're doing your MSc in nonprofit at Columbia. And so I wonder, with all the skill sets you've brought to benefit your operations, your organizations, all the projects, and what do you see in going back to school at this point? What are you pursuing? What are you seeking?
So I asked myself the same question. But I can tell you, I actually had this conversation with someone today. I'm 65% of the way through, and I really enjoy the work. I really, really enjoy it. It's so applicable to what I do day to day in philanthropy. So it doesn't even feel like, to be honest. But at the beginning of the pandemic, I'd always wanted to do a master's. I didn't know where, I didn't know what. At the beginning of the pandemic, I really started thinking about, well, if I'm going to commit 2 years of my life to something, I need to really want to do. And I thought about doing an MBA, because that would be a logical thing for someone in business. Maybe not at this point in my career, but it would be a logical thing. And I thought, well, what am I going to learn that's new? Right? I've done most of it. Practically, I've actually done it in my day-to-day. And so I really want to be a great leader and a major contributor to the nonprofit I'm involved in. And I don't understand how I can, like, what it all looks like and how it all comes together. And I really wanted to get a much better understanding of it. You know, as I said, I spend 95% of my time working time on Waterton. And so, you know, I don't have as much time to spend in philanthropy to really understand it from a practical perspective. So having gone through the program up to this point, I feel like I'm far better equipped when I sit in the boardroom and talk about programming and talk about mission and how we're going to actually make impact and how you evaluate impact, how you structure programs and make sure that you can, you know, be aligned for the full program. You know, there's so many things that come into it that I didn't have a full appreciation for before, and today I do. And I like learning, and I'm happy I made the decision to ultimately go down this path and MBA, which was the alternative.
So then what's that like for you, being in a classroom? I know it's virtual, it's online, but being in a classroom, you have colleagues, and understandably, they're probably coming in from around the world as well. And what could you share with me what it's like to participate with your cohort and where they're coming from and the kind of conversations that you're experiencing?
So they're from everywhere in the world, you're right. Most people actually come from the nonprofit sector. A lot of them are in education, some of them are in arts. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay, a little halting, but we're back.
I thought it went down. So yeah, so people from all different areas. And I've been taking nonprofit courses, but you know, there was some challenge with my schedule. I actually had to take a business class, which I'm taking right now. It's called Human Behavior. And I fully appreciate now what I've been feeling. I don't have as much to add, as much value to add in these classroom settings as my peers, because I spent 17 years in finance and they spent 17 years in nonprofit, or 5 years or 12 years or 25 years. And so when we're having these conversations, for me, it's not as practical. It's more theoretical for me. I've done a tremendous amount with Giving to Girls, Nash's Angels, and Tour of Hope, but I don't live and breathe it every single day. It's not my day-to-day job, where it is for most people. So I think I've learned so much from them because it is. And then what I also realized, having done this business course this semester, when I do have the knowledge and the practical experience, it's so much easier to contribute because you have those stories you can share, examples of how you dealt with situations. But I've learned so much from the group, and as I said, I'll have these contacts and friends of mine forever. Yeah, it's just been a really incredible experience, and that shared passion for doing something that, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, everybody's looking to position themselves to earn a salary and have a job and be a professional, but you know, they get to spend their time doing something really interesting. And I'm not saying finance isn't, but it's pretty cool that they made that choice. And they're all very, very educated, PhDs, but they love the fact that they're making a difference and they contribute all the time to it.
Do you see this as creating a new venture for you or a new project upon graduation? Is there something else that you're going to have a real passion to explore following your degree?
So one of the things that I did consider, and it was as I started learning more about impact investing, is that would it make sense to combine my finance background more with philanthropy and do more of impact investing? And I don't think that's necessarily the right path for myself after spending more time thinking it through. I think for me, it's probably just going to be mostly about serving on nonprofit boards. And maybe at some point, you know, once my professional career comes to an end, which I don't think ever will, because I love working. But once it kind of slows down, it always will eventually at some point, then maybe I'll start spending time in like more of an operational role, working in the nonprofit sector and actually being on the ground involved in helping, you know, build what we're building and putting together programs and things of that nature. But that would be decades. Okay. Not off the table.
So then your exposure in all these different areas and going to doing this program at Columbia in this period where diversity, equity, and inclusion is really becoming a focus of conversation in all walks of life. How has the DEI impacted you, and what are you doing now that contributes to positive change in that space in the future?
Yeah, so I'll first share a story with you that I've shared before, and I find it shocking, but I'll share it. So when we first started raising our first institutional private equity fund, myself and our chief investment officer, we went to a teacher's pension plan in the United States to raise capital. It was, standard kind of thing. You meet with all the different people. The board of trustees were there. There were 30 of them. You have 40 minutes to do your presentation. At 40 minutes, they clock you out, you're done, and that's it. And so he spoke for 20 minutes, I spoke for 20 minutes, and presentation was over. And then one of the board trustees stood up and she said, "Thank you guys so much for coming. And I just want to thank Cheryl. In my 30 years of being on this board, you are the first female partner who has presented to us." I was shocked. Like, how is that even possible? But the reality is that that was the world of private equity in 2006. Changing, it's definitely changing, and it's changing fast, and thankfully it is changing. So I think for us, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a major focus in every business that we're involved with. Having come through the system, I have a full appreciation for some of the challenges that inequality can create. Right. And so we really believe that, and it's really at the core of everything we do, ideas drive success. And so we proactively encourage idea generation from diverse perspectives. And there's tons of research on this. McKinsey put out a report, and it shows that diverse organizations outperform. So it's not just good for the business, it's good practice to structure diverse organizations. The one other thing I would say is diversifying your organization and looking diverse isn't enough. Right. It has to be that it's also inclusive. And I think there's this great quote, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So just because your organization looks diverse, if people within your organization who are in underrepresented minority groups and women do not have a voice in that organization into decisions that are being made, it hasn't gone far enough. And so we are constantly evaluating every single company we're invested in, everything we do to make sure that that is the case. Have diversity within the senior leadership team and people have a voice. And I think that for sure is the way we're going as a society, which is great. And for us, and it means a lot to me, having climbed the ranks through private equity and mining. It wasn't just private equity, it was mining private equity. So very, very few women, very, very few minorities. And so I think it's super important, and it's just good practice, and it's good for.
Well, and also in your Green Cube analysis venture on machine learning, that's another space that doesn't have as much a presence of women in that area as well. And I wonder if you wanted to speak to that venture yourself and how that's been working for you.
Yeah, so we launched in 2018. It was an idea, and we brought in a young, hungry Dartmouth graduate to basically spend his days figuring out which of our ideas made the most sense. We had a team that we were working with in India on the actual AI machine learning side, and he was more of like the sales kind of business commercial aspect of it. So that's where we started in 2018, and we pivoted probably about 15 times. Finally, at the end of 2020, we launched our product and we commercialized. We're now a cloud-based SaaS platform, which provides us with a tremendous amount of virality and optionality, and that was critical to us. We've been able to put the right people in place. We have a fantastic senior leadership team. And they're now, running it. We just sit on the board. We initially were executive board members, but today we're just on the board. They're doing their Series A round in the next 3 months. They raised a few $1 million 6 months ago, and they're off to the races. And we have some super interesting venture capital investors that are involved, and we're signing a massive contract with SalesLoft, some other CRMs. So, it's so interesting. It's just, obviously success essentially comes at the intersection of luck and hard work. The harder you work, the higher your probability is going to be that you're going to have some success. This has been a huge amount of work for a lot of people, and taking it from just a concept to where it is today, and it's something, again, like, we're just very proud of what we've been able to do, and not just what we've been able to do, but the culture we've been able to build in the organization. And I think that's so critical, is that if you can put the right people in place, but you really have to build a culture where it's based on integrity, hard work, and people who feel like they're owners of the business. And if you can do that, then you can create a lot of value.
I'm going to just let our viewers know if they have questions. I've got a bit of a question panel here that if people want to ask questions, they can start generating them. So while they're doing that, I do have another question or two for you. I wonder, we've talked about these different walks of life almost that you have, and is there a space that you see a convergence where these things start coming together, and now your thoughts and your actions and your activities and your projects are actually converging, philanthropy and entrepreneurship and your professional background in the area of finance and investment, where it just becomes this one nice natural path that they've all come together?
So I mentioned this a bit earlier. The one place I think that made sense for them all to come together is really impact investing. And it really is a combination of all three, right? Impact investing is investing, so there's a financial aspect of it. It's also investing in businesses, and those businesses, their mission is partially to make a return, but partially to make a difference and make an impact. So, and I spent quite a bit of time on this, and it's a big thing. There's a lot of impact investment funds, and who knows, maybe it's something I might consider at some point in time. It just didn't necessarily fit with where I am today, and I think the Waterton private equity business is something that I really do want to continue to see it through. But that is exactly what you just said. Impact investing takes all three of them, puts it into one. It allows you to build businesses, put people in place, establish cultures. It allows you to deploy capital, put capital structures in place that are quite complex, which I enjoy. And it also allows you to make a massive impact, ultimately, with the businesses, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, in communities.
Do you see machine learning having a big play in this space as well?
It's tough, right? Machine learning is important for many different industries. It just depends on how you apply it, and can you apply it.
Right.
I don't know if in the nonprofit sector up to this point in time, I really haven't seen anything where I would say it goes beyond that. Like, I'm actually in a data analytics course right now, where all we do is talk about data, big data, and our nonprofits actually using their big data effectively, because essentially they have a tremendous amount of data. It's just they don't have a data scientist. Right? There's no data scientist sitting inside of a nonprofit organization saying, wow, let's put this data in a form and then let's start evaluating and putting it through machine learning and predict what doesn't happen. And that's because most nonprofits don't have budgets to do that, right? They're operating on a shoestring. Right. So, I think in that space, it's tough to see today how we make a lot of progress, but eventually, yes, I would think that machine learning would play a major role in the nonprofit sector.
Okay. Well, I've had a real great pleasure being able to ask all the questions, but there's people that are starting to really flood the wave, so to speak, of the question chat space here. I'm going to ask a few and see how this all goes. I'm just reading it now. Don't mind me. It seems really far away. This is from Sean Chamberlain. Congratulations, Cheryl. Extremely well deserved. Question here: how did Goodman Brock uniquely prepare you for your career path?
Okay, interesting question. I would say that there's 4 areas that that contributed to me being prepared to kind of continue forward and do what I've done the last 17 years. So first is the technical knowledge. Second is my co-op placement. The third is my varsity sports experience. And the third is my network. So the technical knowledge comes from the classroom. We all understand it. And I think while I was doing my economics exams, I don't think I had a full appreciation for the fact that it was going to actually contribute to my future in some way. But it did. And I think I learned a lot about finance, about stocks and bonds, and how to value companies and correlation coefficients, which again seemed very irrelevant at the time, but became very relevant today. So I think that the technical knowledge was super helpful. The second is my co-op placements. I mentioned this earlier. Scotia McLeod was really what allowed me to get my foot in the door. Without that experience, I would not have gotten a job. I'm 100% certain. And so being able to share kind of my actual experience of what I'd been doing and my understanding of the markets and how I was going to be a value-added member of that team was critical. Varsity sports. I was on the varsity volleyball team for 4 years. It taught me about commitment and dedication and the need to make sacrifices to get to where you want to get to. And, 6 a.m. practices were terrible, but you did it, and because you wanted to win. And I played with an incredible group of girls who I am still great friends with to this day. But I think it really built a lot of character and taught me a lot about, what you need to do to succeed. And then the last part is network. My closest friends in the world I've met at Brock, and I've been able to, beyond just build friendships, I've built a network of business within a business community. And that's the one thing I probably wish I would have done more of, to be honest. I think having a network is so critical in everything you do, specifically in business. But I was able to build a network, and I was able to carry that forward with me. But those are really the 4 things that contributed. And I loved my time at Brock. It was great. I had an amazing time.
Okay, thank you. I'm smiling because I have a question here from Roloff Mackin, one of our instructors, and he says, I love raising capital. And he asks, who are you targeting?
Okay, interesting. So for capital raising for private equity specifically, we typically target US-based pension funds, endowments, foundations, and family offices. And then internationally, sovereign wealth funds and a few pension funds out of Europe. We have a very small investor base in private equity. There's only 15 investors, which is unheard of. And they're very concentrated, obviously, given the $2 billion asset management platform. But yeah, so I think for us, we're really focused on US investors who really understand what we do and are comfortable making the types of investments in real assets and mining. And then when it comes to venture, I spend a lot of time, used to pre-pandemic, on the road traveling. And so anytime I was in San Francisco, I would always make an effort to connect with any contact I could in Silicon Valley who's in venture capital. And building out that network has been super helpful in launching some of the venture things. They're always looking for new ideas. And I think I mentioned this previously, in Canada, we just have this funding gap for early stage companies that, once you find them, they're good, they have great people, they have good ideas, they like network in Silicon Valley. We're able to bring, those investors to the table, which adds a tremendous amount of credibility to the things we're investing in, and also provides capital for those companies. And then in the nonprofit sector, we don't raise capital, so we fund everything ourselves, and that's kind of both myself and the Tour Hope initiative. We fund ourselves, and then for Ashley's Angels, we did a lot of, myself and my brother-in-law, both, as I mentioned, worked on Bay Street, and so it was really about our network, right? The banks, the law firms. Mostly corporate donors would be involved in that, and it was more of a relationship-oriented type exercise.
And you've raised on Ashley's Angels around $2 million in support of research. I'm curious, what kind of research advances are happening in that area, and potentially directly related to what you've been able to contribute to the cause?
So there's tons of programs ongoing, and my sister Sherry, who runs the entire program and the entire organization, she is engaged with Sick Kids Hospital in actually deciding on which programs we want to fund. So the way it typically works is she would meet with the doctors in the organ transplant department at Sick Kids. They would have conversations about, these are all the programs and requirements, and based on the budgets of what's been raised, she'll make the decision on what it gets allocated to. But we do things like medical research, as well as buying medical machines that are required for the hospital. So it's kind of all encompassing. The good thing about it is Sick Kids, we're a third-party charity, so we're not actually under the Sick Kids umbrella. We're in a partnership with Sick Kids, which allows the flexibility to make those decisions on really where, based on obviously the recommendations of medical professionals, where the capital should be allocated. And I think my sister has done, as I said, a great job of putting it all together. And I serve more of a role on raising the capital to actually make the difference. And she's really engaged on the actual deployment into the actual programs.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking about all the different activities you've done and how you've people lean into you for support in different ways. And like you mentioned, your sister has used raising capital. Interesting question here, because of so many different things you've gone into, and a lot of them are really new and really inspirational, the spaces that you've navigated. I have a question here that asks, first off, it says, amazing to hear about your experiences, Cheryl. This is from Avid R. Did you ever feel imposter syndrome during your career? And if so, how did you deal with it? So kind of going into space and going, geez, they're going to figure me out. And just that feeling of overwhelmed, I guess, with the experience that you're about to take on. And people are looking towards you to be able to navigate that.
Yeah, so really great question, because I had imposter syndrome like you wouldn't believe when I first started my career in finance. My job when I was working at the hedge fund in Toronto was to meet with management teams, obviously do the background work on research and build models, but really meeting with the management teams of companies and then making a recommendation to our chief investment officer on whether we made an investment or not. And so I would go into these boardrooms in our office, and I was meeting with companies that were in the oil and gas sector and the mining sector. And they were all CEOs, and CFOs. So as you can imagine, there were no women. And most of them were older gentlemen. And I was the only female in the room, always. So I felt like quite an imposter. So I called my dad, actually. One night I was studying for the CFA exams, and I was really stressed out, and I was feeling like, had low self-esteem as it related to this issue. And I explained to him, look, I'm going into these meetings, I'm the only female, it's really hard for me, and I don't know what to do. And he said, you know what? He said, you have to look at this challenge as an opportunity. He said, it's unfortunate, this is the world we live in. You are probably going to be one of the very few women that these management teams are going to sit across the table from. And you may walk in, and because of that, because they haven't seen many of you in the boardroom, the bar is going to be very low. You do your research, you prepare, you are going to blow them away, and they will always remember you. And it's so true. I would 5 years later send an email to a CEO of a company and say, we met 5 years ago when I was at XYZ. I'd love to meet up with you. I'm in Vancouver. Let's grab lunch. And they were like, oh, hey, Cheryl, how are you? It was such an interesting way of taking something that was such a challenge and repositioning it in my mind as an opportunity. Now, what that required me to do was put a tremendous amount of work into the research and understanding the companies before I sat across from them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to prove that I was actually, deserved to sit at the table. But I think that was one of the things where I completely felt like an imposter. And, with that advice from my dad, I was able to really reset and position it as an opportunity and then make it work.
That advice lends itself really well for this next question, and there might be some more that you can offer to Cindy Miller, who mentions you are working and thriving in a male-dominated industry. What advice do you have for other women based on your own experiences to overcome those barriers? So maybe you have even more to offer beyond what your father gave you as advice.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Cindy. One of the things that I have been fortunate with in my career is that even though there weren't a lot of women in the industry, I worked with men who always were willing to give a seat at the table if I. And I don't know if that's rare, because I have only had that experience. But I never really felt internally within my companies I worked for that there was a ceiling. It didn't exist. I don't think that's the case for most. So I do feel like if you're in an organization, feel that there's a ceiling, you need to try and find ways to think through, plan, and strategize on how you can get beyond that. And if not, you know, really understand, is it the right place for you? And I think networking, making sure you're involved as much as you possibly can be. There's tons of amazing, like, women in private equity, women in mining. And initially when I joined a lot of these organizations, you know, I didn't have very high expectations of the fact that people are going to show up and take an interest, but they do. And it allows you to build a network. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and depending on the sector you're in, is how do you build that network? You know, are you going to take me to the hockey game? You know, are you going to take me on this trip, or are you going to take your buddy fishing, your buddy to the hockey game? And I don't fit your buddy's profile. So it's really a matter of finding unique ways to build your network, and then making sure that you're in a role within a company where they value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you have a path forward. And if you're contributing time and you're working hard and you're pushing yourself, being recognized for that. And I really do believe that the landscape around us is changing. And I think it's changing for multiple reasons. We talk about this quite frequently, incentives, and, you know, why is the ESG landscape changing, or why is the DEI landscape changing? And I really think it's being driven primarily from large institutions like BlackRock, for example, who say, we're not going to support your board slate if you don't have X% of diversity on your board. Or Goldman Sachs saying, you're not going to take your company public unless you have diversity on your board. And I think that's flowing through not just on boards, but also within management teams. We have a huge amount of work to do on this, but you're at least starting to see it. And so, yeah, so that would be the advice I would give to women who are in more of a male-dominated industry. There's definitely a path to success. You just got to work hard.
And you know, you've got your ICD.D designation, the Director's Education Program. And so you would have seen a lot of dialogue for sure there, and living through it. When you look at the spectrum of board governance and women on boards, the area that you're in is one of, you know, when you go to the far left, as far as percentage or ratios, is probably sitting there as about as far left as you can get with respect to the ratio. Are you seeing that changing in the years going forward, or maybe even the last couple of years? Are you seeing it's moving not so much to the far left, but approaching center?
I would say that it's definitely changing. So there is a push to, well, and again, I think it's really driven by the fact that, you know, there's these rating agencies out there, large institutional investors who demand it. And so I think that and that's great. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a good thing, because you need to start from somewhere. The pressure has to come from somewhere to then see a diverse group of people and really see the impact they can make and how great they can be. Again, to my pointing to the McKinsey study, it's proven diverse organizations have better performance. So I think that it is shifting, and probably not fast enough, but it's definitely shifting in the right direction, and slowly. You know, I look at all these private equity reports from Preqin that talk about, you know, women and underrepresented minority groups in the percentage, and I think it's like 5% in the mining sector specifically of private equity investment companies are managed by women. So obviously that's quite a low percentage, but I think, yeah, it's definitely changing.
Excellent. I have a question here from Abdul Rahimi, our director of the Goodman Group. He mentions what attributes of your time at Brock University has had the most impact on your present self? And then what would you like to see more of at our Goodman School of Business at Brock University occurring, likely in the vein that we've been talking about this hour?
So I would say what had the most impact on my present self, and this is just comes down to character. It's just an honest answer, because I think it built this character for me, is that being involved on a varsity team while being in school, while having co-op placements, while coaching. I coached an OVA boys basketball team, having a part-time job. Like, I understood through that experience that you had to make lots of sacrifices. You had to push your limits to really achieve your goals. And I think that setting big goals is critical, and setting goals that you're passionate about. And I set my goals for myself based on what I wanted to accomplish. And I think that's so critical. And I learned that while I was at Brock. There wasn't one specific thing. It was really a broad blend of everything. And then the second question is what to going forward with the program. Yeah, I think, and obviously we'll get together, Andrew, at some point in time and chat more about this. But just understanding kind of what is going on with the corporate kind of school relationships, and how are the how is the university company to get this in place, and pick programs, and all around that. I think that for me was one area when I was in school that it wasn't really defined. Obviously, that was 17 years ago. Yeah. So I know you guys have a beautiful facility now, and obviously it's a very different type of a program. But that I think is critical, right, for all the students. They want to know that I'm going to finish my degree, I'm going to make this investment of time here. I want to be here. It's a great program. But when I graduate, I want to know that, I've got that potential to work at XYZ firm. And I think that's critical for all students.
Right. Thank you. I have another one that kind of segues into this, and it's from Joel Panus. He mentions, my friends and I are currently working on a startup idea. Do you have any advice on how we should go about finding investors and securing funding? Sometimes it feels like there is a lack of resources for early stage startups in Canada. And I see this as a segue because I think that's part of the preparedness of graduates now who might pursue their passion around a startup or their own new venture. So if you can help with Joel on that question, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and I think I would say that the best thing you can do is outreach and try to build a connection with people on LinkedIn. Like, I have had people reach out to me on LinkedIn, and they position it as such. I can see your profile on LinkedIn, would love to take 5 minutes of your time to have a conversation, working on something really interesting, looking for some guidance. People will respond to that. I've hired 3 people this way because, you obviously, once you get to know them and I've played quite a mentorship role in a lot of young people's lives. But it's really putting yourself out there and trying to connect. And I think that, people don't just turn around and write checks for no reason. They write checks because they believe in you and they actually think you're going to do something amazing. You need to show them you're going to do something amazing. And the best way to start doing that is by building that connection. And then once you have that connection, you can start talking to them about your opportunity. And unless you have something that's like well advanced and $5 million a year of EBITDA, then I can point you in a specific direction. Say go talk to XYZ venture capital firm. But if it's really early stages, I think it's more relationship based. There's some incubators in Toronto that you can contact, and Waterloo. You should try and reach out to them. There's some fantastic programs that you can become part of if there's like an IP AI element to it. So there's definitely that network starting out, but I would say those 2 areas you should focus in is Waterloo, and if it's tech specifically, Waterloo in Toronto, and then build out your connections as best as you possibly can, and hopefully 1 or 2 or 3 hit.
So here you are, successful in profession and finance, a philanthropist, an organ donor, a person who's entrepreneurial and has a number of startups. All of these ventures, all these activities, all these projects define and shape you, who you are. I wonder, how do you see and how would you define leadership?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think to be a good leader, you have to take a real authentic interest in people. I think there's this challenge of going through your career and your early days in a career, and sometimes for a decade plus, right. You're just based on your individual contribution and your technical skills. At some point, if you're climbing a corporate ladder, that changes, and you all of a sudden become responsible for a team of people. And nobody teaches you how to do that. It's just like a flick the switch expectation. Now you're going to manage people. And I think most people are inclined to just revert back to what they're used to is, well, I'm an individual contributor and I'm good at my technical job, and therefore I'll just keep doing my job and not take an interest in the people you manage. I think being a good leader, you have to really take an interest in the people who you're developing, And it's for selfish reasons, obviously, you want your organization to be as successful as possible, but you also want them to develop as people. I also think having a high degree of integrity, transparency, being honest, setting big goals, understanding individual goals and aligning them with the organization, and then setting a culture and just like with a passion. And people want to work for organizations. They want to work for organizations that they feel some sense of connection to. And if you can create that as a leader, they'll stay with you forever. So I think that there's so much involved. I can say my transition from being more of an individual contributor to a leader was challenging. You know, I would be lying if I didn't say that. We actually did leadership courses in my firm because we thought it was exceptionally important so that we could, again, to my point of scaling, we scaled our business. All of a sudden you're working by yourself in a team of one, and all of a sudden you have 15 people working for you, and right. You know, nobody teaches you this is exactly how you lead these people. So I think, you know, really developing those skills and taking the time to develop those skills is so critical. And critical for yourself, for the people who are reporting into you, and also for the organization as a whole.
Well, that I think is a great cap to our conversation this evening. I thank you so much for giving us your time today, and also for allowing us to recognize you as our 2021 Goodman School of Business Distinguished Graduate. Your background and your experiences since graduation are really, I know I've said this a few times, inspirational. The fact that you've given back and contributed in so many ways, and also demonstrated leadership in an area that, as we've talked about, not necessarily has the representation of women that other parts of other industries do. You've been a leader in not only breaking through in certain areas, but also just demonstrating that this is a space for many. And one of the things that we do look at within our school is that our students, we are preparing not only them to be within a particular industry and graduate as a group, but they are one individual who are going to be supporting and helping many. And I think you truly demonstrate that. Your demonstration of our values of professionalism, perseverance, and passion certainly have been demonstrated in this conversation today, and in your experience and background. I really want to thank you on behalf of the whole Goodman School of Business and our community here at Brock University for allowing us to honor you in this way. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored that you recognize me in this way, and I really appreciate the time and this opportunity. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation.
Wonderful. And I look forward to that too. And I think we have Manpreet Sandhu, who's looking for us on the sidelines to enter into a conversation and to sign us off here.
So thank you, Dean. I'd like to extend a sincere thank you to you, Cheryl, for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about your career journey and how you got to where you are today. As a student, it is so inspiring to hear from professionals like yourself and about how hard work can truly pay off. As a woman, I'm so inspired by your philanthropic efforts, especially in regard to what you have done for girls in developing countries and for women within your industry. Seeing such a successful female and Brock graduate is truly inspiring to me. I will now pass it back to Daniel to close the event.
Thank you, Manpreet. And thank you again to everyone for joining us today. Cheryl, it's been an absolute privilege to hear from you. And your path from Brock graduate to accomplished business professional and philanthropist has been very inspiring to hear about. I know that students and new graduates can surely learn from the wisdom that you've shared with us today as they eventually venture off into their own professional careers. So thank you, Cheryl, for sharing your advice, your stories, and your journey with us. We are truly proud of all that you have accomplished and how you continually represent the Goodman values of passion, perseverance, and professionalism. On behalf of all of our attendees today, we thank you for your time and your dedication to the Goodman School of Business. Thank you once again to everyone for joining us today, and that concludes our event.